All right. Let me just double check. All right. One, two, three. All right. Well, welcome. My name is Carlos Tercios, and I am the host for the Carlos Tercios Uncensored show. And today we have Wade Miller, who's a senior advisor for the Center for Renewing America. And the topic for today will be about the Great Replacement, why that's happening, how it's happening, and of course, what we can do in the country to stop that. And so I'm going to pass that on to Wade to give his introduction and his background, and then we'll dive into that topic. So you have the floor, Wade.
Thank you so much for having me. A little bit of background. I dropped out of college to join the Marine Corps after 9/11. Served as an infantryman in the Marine Corps, did 3 combat deployments. When I got out, I went back, finished up school, graduated magna cum laude um, in political science, and then got an internship at the Heritage Foundation. Parlayed that into a position at Heritage Action, where I worked for 5 years. And there I worked with Russ Vogt, who was, I think, the executive director of Heritage Action at the time. I'll come back to Russ here in a minute. And then from that, I went, after 5 years of that, I became the political director for Senator Ted Cruz. And then after 2.5 years of that, I became the chief of staff for Congressman Chip Roy, and I was his chief of staff for about 2.5 years as well. And then Chip Roy and Russ Vogt, who at this point had been the OMB director for President Trump, the Office of Management and Budget, which is, for those who don't know, a pretty powerful, maybe the most important agency in the federal government, because it kind of controls the president's agenda in many ways and helps facilitate advancing the agenda through the various other agencies. And so I went, Chip Roy, Congressman Chip Roy, and Russ Vogt were longtime friends, and I was friends with both of them. And they decided it would be best for the movement and for, myself included, I think, to go work with Russ. And Russ started the Center for Renewing America. And coming out of the Trump administration, when right after Biden was inaugurated, the Center for Renewing America was started, and we knew coming out of the Trump administration that there were a number of America First correctives that we really needed more work on, and that Trump was really just getting started. The agencies were starting to hit their stride. They had ironed out a lot of the kinks, and you'll remember towards the end of the first Trump administration, they had passed a fairly sweeping anti-CRT executive order. And I think that was a big sign that President Trump was taking very seriously and wanted to start going after what we later coined as woke and weaponized government. And we've seen the full onslaught of that in the last 4 years and what that means and what that becomes. And a big part of, the woke agenda, of course, it has been, the border policies of the left, and they're fundamentally wanting to change this country in a lot of different ways. So I went over to become the executive director and senior advisor to Russ, and then executive director of our C4 entity, which is kind of the activist side of things. And on a day-to-day basis, I focus a lot of on kind of government relations, so working with members of Congress and staff that work on Capitol Hill, and then depending on the state and the issue, working with state lawmakers and their staffers to advance issues that we see are kind of national importance, but that we can cascade down and fight on at the federal level, the state level, the local level. One of the topics that many people are probably familiar with that we really popularized is the idea of declaring an invasion. We wrote probably the most significant legal memo advocating for this, and then for the next year and a half spent relentlessly pushing the idea, going on Fox News and other outlets and talking about the concept. We had Ken Cuccinelli, who was the principal author of the legal decision. Of course, Jeff Clark was working on this, and others like Mark Paoletta were taking a look at the work. And these are all very respected lawyers, especially in federal DC circles amongst the actual conservative movement. We then got the Attorney General of Arizona to write a legal memo affirming our argument. And after that, we really put kind of a full court press on Governor Abbott to say it's not good enough just to blame Biden. Yes, this is Biden's problem, but we have to take it upon ourselves to do something about it. And here's a legal opportunity for a legal means by which you can do this that comports with all existing federal statutes, all existing case law. So that's the type of paradigm we work on. We're working on impoundment right now, which is the idea that the president can actually choose not, in many cases, to spend the full sum of an appropriation. So if Democrats give him $800 million to spend on DEI, but he can write an executive order and then impound all of that money and not spend it. And that's an authority that is not used and has not been used for a very long time, but it could be paradigm shifting. And I predict that the left might even try to impeach President Trump if he uses his power. So those are the type of paradigms we push at Center for Renewing America. It's not the little stuff, although the little stuff matters, but we focus our research and time on real paradigm shifting ideas and concepts. Like I said, we coined the term woke and weaponized, and we wrote the first woke and weaponized budget, which was to de-emphasize the focus on social security and Medicare reform as a means of balancing the budget. Because if you do both of those things and you balance the spreadsheet, you'll still lose America. And so really what you need to do is look at the budgeting as an opportunity to defund the entities and the apparatuses and the programs and the bureaucrats that are using those tax dollars to fundamentally erode our culture and attack us. And so that's kind of in a nutshell a lot of the types of work we do.
Okay, no, awesome. Y'all do a lot of great policy work, and especially in key issues that is affecting America. Especially, I know you mentioned DEI, and that's something that, as a young Gen Z voter, I've seen that as a high school student and as a college student. This obsession on DEI, using taxpayers' money to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion within the classroom, within professional development training, within just policy in general. There are school districts that promote that endorse that, and city councils as well. Here in Fort Worth.
And to unpack, because I think this will actually bleed into the next part of our conversation.
Yep.
So what it is it's basically a systematic program to emphasize three main, for lack of a better word, topics. You've got diversity, equity, inclusion. And so the question is, what they're really trying to get at is, do you have a diverse workforce that's representative of all of America? Are you being inclusive? Now, I think that those are interesting topics to talk about in grade school. Different people have different ideas, and we need to make sure we include people. But they're using these ideas that we learn at a young age in I think, a more innocent framing. And then they're kind of sandwiching in between this the idea of equity.
Yes.
Meaning that there must be disparate outcomes that advantage one group over another based on historical perceptions of victimhood versus non-victimhood, or perpetrator versus victim. And so what this necessarily means is that if you are a corporation, how can you be judged if you are actually implementing DEI? Well, the only way you can really do that, and at least the way that the political left will operate, is they'll look and say, you don't have exactly 13% African-American executives in this company. Yeah. So what they're de facto demanding are racial quotas. And if you're de facto demanding racial quotas, you are de facto saying that hiring decisions must be made on the basis of race. And then, because it's not just racial, it's all sorts of different, intersectional traits. It's sex. So, we have to hire more women. And so even though this person is more qualified than the other person, we're going to go with the lesser qualified woman. Now, if the most qualified candidate happens to be a black woman, then great, hire that black woman. That's the society we should live in. We should be hiring the most qualified person. And so
Yes.
what's happening all over HR departments all over the country is there's this overemphasis on making decisions on hiring, admissions, benefits, promotions. I don't know if I said admissions, but colleges. So all of these decisions are now being made on the basis of race, sex, and other protected classes, which of course is a violation of Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. If it's a federal governmental agency, it's a violation of Title VI of the 1965 1965 Civil Rights Act. And if it's based on sex, it could be running in violation of Title X of the Higher Education Act. So, there's a lot of civil rights violations happening. They just kind of ignore all of that. And of course, the Attorney General's office is not going to, a Democrat Attorney General is not going to bring charges. So, that's the work. So all about what we're talking about next is based on kind of this woke umbrella of DEI. And then you've got some subcategories like anti-racism, which of course,
Yes.
you would think is to be against racism. But anti-racism is actually not that. It's not to oppose racism. It's to support racial discrimination for the purposes of equity. Ibram X. Kendi says that in his book. And by the way, people like myself and to a greater extent, Chris Rufo and James Lindsay, they were blasting him on these comments in his book so much that all of the new editions of How to Be an Anti-Racist have erased that. The digital versions of these books, if you bought them, they went back and retroactively changed it. You cannot find these quotes that I'm telling you about in Ibram X. Kendi's newest versions of his books, because he knows he got way too comfortable in saying what he actually believed and went forward. But that's exactly what it is. It is to support racial discrimination for the purposes of equity. That's exactly what anti-racism is. And yet, a few short years ago, if you were to oppose anti-racism, you would be tantamount to being a Nazi or KKK member or something of that nature.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all of this, what's happening in the corporations, in our government institutions, and this movement, this anti-racist movement, this critical race theory movement, DEI, this cultural revolution movement. That's what I call it, the racial cultural revolution movement. It's just there to destroy America. And it's there to divide America. And it's something that, my wife and I have had conversations because I'm Hispanic, my mom's from Mexico. And I noticed growing up that we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, we celebrate Black History Month, Asian American History Month, Jewish American History Month, Indian American History Month. But white students were basically put on a side. And there's different types of backgrounds. There's German background, there's Irish background, there's Italian. My wife has Italian and Finnish and English background. And I'm like, man, that's kind of weird because I always question things like, why wait, so everyone else gets to celebrate but not them? And then of course you can't question about mass migration, the illegal aliens coming here, and you got to support immigration. You got to support all these millions of people who are not coming here illegally, and they're just taking our health care, they're taking our taxpayers money, um, and they're using us like a piggy bank. I mean, they're abusing us, they're abusing taxpayers. And so I guess we can now dive into the great replacement. But overall, what is the great replacement? The definition of that, and then based on your research, because I know you've written about the great replacement with the institution you're working for. Um, how is it happening? And then what can we do to prevent that?
Yeah. So let me back up and just kind of say that a lot of what the left has done is they recognize that traditional class warfare Marxism would not work in the United States the way that it worked in Europe so easily. And so there was this mass movement that really picked up steam in the 70s and 80s to reorient Marxist ideology through identitarian lenses. Instead of class warfare, it was identities. So this is where you started getting the research into critical race theory and other critical theories, and all of these woke isms kind of come out of this identitarian, because they recognize that if we can get people to struggle against one another on the basis of class, or on the basis of identities, and have identity deconstruction, and so that's a never-ending wedge that is driven, because at a certain point it's, I'm white, you're black, there's a wedge. And now the black person is, well, I'm a gay black and you're a straight black, and that's a wedge. And now it's I'm a trans black and you're a gay black, so that's another wedge. And now it's, well, I am a trans disabled black man, and so that's another wedge. And then it's someone that says, well, I'm a pansexual disabled rape victim black female, and so it goes on and on and on. And the purpose of it is to drive wedges into every sector of our society on the basis of identity. And it's a constant struggle to see who can be the biggest victim. That's not to say that there have not been historically things in our country that have happened where there has been predominantly one group of people who have been victimized over another. We can talk about that. We can reconcile with it. We can teach about it in school. That's fine. So that then bleeds into everything that we're seeing today. That's the animus of the left. They know that the only way that they can punch through the founding principles that really shape our culture is through identitarian Marxist ideology. And so far, it's been way more successful than class warfare. Bernie Sanders is a great example of kind of a classical class warfare Marxist. He is an extreme minority in his party. The progressive left, the identitarian woke left, now dominates the Democrat Party. You do not have any more conservative Democrats in the party like you did even in the 90s. You would still have conservative Democrats. You would have people in West Texas or East Texas that identified as Democrats that were more conservative than Republicans in New Hampshire. And that just doesn't exist anymore because the left has completely dominated and pushed the spectrum of their ideology. So out of that is, on the one hand, they've got to shape our culture. And on the other hand, they've got to outnumber us. And so this is kind of where we get into the Great Replacement. And your first question is, what is the Great Replacement? Well, that's heavily dependent on who's asking the question. If it's kind of the fringe white supremacist right, they're going to have their answer for that. If you're asking the progressive left, they're going to have their answer for that. And so I'll start out with those two. And I think that's where the change in how we talk about it has come about, in that, so the left has been doing this. They've been using open borders to move millions and millions of illegals in this country. They're doing it on purpose. They know what they're doing. And so there was kind of a reactionary, there was a recognition of this from some radical circles on the right, many of them white supremacist leaning to full on very, very, very racist ideologies. And so they saw what the left was doing and they objected to it. They recognized rightly that what the left was doing was wrong, but they incorrectly diagnosed the reason it was wrong. So their reason is that they just don't want brown people coming up and outnumbering the white people. And so therefore it's bad. And yes, there were some elements of their arguments that would then bleed into culture, but it was through the lens of culture, and a nation can only exist with white identity and only white identity, and that kind of nonsense that I just don't fundamentally disagree with. So I think that even as recently as a few years ago, and of course, if you were to ask the left what it means, they would say that it's a radical right, white supremacist ideology that is completely debunked and has no basis in reality. And so I found myself someone who in no way, shape, or form identifies with or agrees with some of these radical right, openly racist, ideologues that are attacking what the left is doing, but also recognizing just with clear eyes that, of course, the left is doing this. And the reason, as I started looking into it, that it became more clear is because they just say it. They openly say it. They don't deny it. And sometimes it's not even like 2 or 3 degrees, and you have to stitch together certain logics to make it work. They just say it. But when you branch out further from that, we've already laid the predicate and the groundwork in this conversation that the left has this identitarian cultural movement, and they want to replace the founding culture with their progressive dingist or identitarian Marxist ideology. And so they have to supplant the predominant existing culture. And that culture is one that you and I exist in. That culture is one where my Black Marine buddy Josh and my Hispanic Marine buddy Pedro, and those are not made up names. I know it sounds very stereotypical, but his name is literally Pedro. I won't say his last name out of respect for his privacy. But we would watch football on Sundays in the barracks and hang out, and we were the same culture. We were the same people. We believe the same things. They're both very right-wing. They're both very big Trump supporters. That is my people. And so I didn't identify with this movement that we have to oppose the left on this because of white identity and white supremacist ideology. I saw that as repugnant. But I did recognize that the left absolutely was doing this. And so I set out to kind of figure out a theory of the case. And it comes down to 2 basic things. And one is there is a very, very, very racist element in the left that their animating purpose in all of this is they do not like white people and they want to replace white people. That is correct. There's also another element in the left, and it's not overt racism. It's more of a power politics argument, which is they recognize the ratios in which white people vote. They want to replace those white people with other people who vote their way. It's not necessarily race-based. They would take 10 million Canadians if they could make it work, as long as they knew that they would vote for the radical left neo-Marxist agenda. And so those are the 2 competing strains. The more radical elements are right out and open about it. And, I'll give you a quote from Van Jones, who I don't consider to be a radically racist individual. I do think he dabbles in some of these things that are, starting to borderline on it, but he's an otherwise fairly smart, sometimes objective political observer, very radically left. But he said that's basically the request from the racial justice left, is that we want the white majority to go from being a majority to being a minority and to like it. That's what Van Jones said on national television on an interview. And I've got quote after quote after quote. If you read my paper on this, I really go through and kind of document a lot of what the left has said. And even as recently as, I don't have it pulled up, but on my paper on the website, we just added in a quote from Kamala Harris, where she basically makes a great replacement comment. And it's just right in your face. And so the left has this open borders agenda. They're bringing across millions and millions of people. These are not the brightest and best. Now, pause. We talk in not in absolutes. We talk in trends. So if 20 million people have come across the border, I know that there's going to be a valedictorian. I know that there's going to be someone who started a business or saved a little girl's life. This isn't to say that immigrants are bad people. It's to say that we are a nation, we're a political community, and that we have borders, and that we should have a national policy that says when we allow people in, it should be for the betterment of the political community, and that is the primary factor. It should not be because we want to have more votes than the other side, and it definitely shouldn't be because we want to destroy the predominant culture that exists today, which the left will say. Again, in my paper, I start out with a little snippet talking about, the white supremacist viewpoint and how it's wrong. I don't focus on that because I think that pretty much everyone gets that viewpoint is pretty radical and not necessarily anything that like common sense people would agree with. And I know this because I've been in the grassroots all over the country in rooms where people feel really safe to speak their mind. And everyone pretty much agrees with me. It doesn't mean there's not racists in this country, but I've been in Tea Party groups. I've been in very, very conservative groups. No one says like, hey, we should get rid of the Hispanic Americans as well. The there's Hispanic Americans in the rooms in these activist meetings. They're part of these conservative groups. They're part of the fabric of the conservative movement. We want to have an honest conversation about we need secure borders, and the decisions made should be in the best interests of the American public. And by the way, we should be vetting these people. All the time I hear from, the State Department types that we have stringent vetting processes. Well, if you were to bring a person over from Gaza right now, a Palestinian, refugee, for instance, and started really asking the vetted questions, you can go look at the Pew Research on this. Like 90-something% of them believe that apostates should be murdered. Well, I would argue that if someone's going to come to the United States and they have a strong opinion that if you try to leave the religion of Islam, it's okay to murder them, you should not be allowed in. And we do not vet, we do not ask. And by the way, this goes along with other extremist ideologies. If you're coming from South America and you believe in Marxism, should be an automatic disqualifier. Now, if you're a United States citizen, you have the First Amendment right to do, believe whatever you want to believe. But we are under no mandate to allow people in who do not agree with the foundations of our country. And this, as my paper shows, is exactly what the left is trying to do. They're trying to bring in millions and millions of people and then gaslight you. And then when you raise objections about it, they say things like, you must hate migrants. I think that because we've had so many people coming across the border lately, that we should have a temporary pause and reassess and allow the current legal migrant community time to properly assimilate into our culture. And by the way, I said culture. There's this meme out there that multiculturalism is in itself a wonderful thing. Well, if you look at Iraq, it has three cultures. It has the Sunni, Shia, and the Kurds. Those are three different nations living within one border, and they've been constantly at odds, and they've used power against one another to attack one another, murder one another. You cannot exist long-term. You cannot have a stable regime if you don't have a predominant culture, which is to say a predominant nation that exists within your borders. And so this preoccupation by Europe and the United States and the West of how wonderful multiculturalism is, that's a poison pill. That's not to say that we can't be accepting if we have common sense immigration and let's say that there is a legitimate need for legal immigration. And I don't think that, if I had my pick, I would have a temporary pause again to give the legal community time to adjust. But if at any certain point in time in the next 5 years, we were to look around and say, you know what, it's in our best interest to allow 5,000 people in. Well, not all 5,000 people are going to be fully steeped in American ideology because they weren't born here. They didn't go to school, assuming the schools are teaching about what it means to be an American, which I don't think that they are. But they do go through an acculturation process, a citizenship process, and they take citizenship tests and all of that. And they over time learn. That doesn't mean that you can't, wear a turban and be culturally American. Like I said, I grew up in a different home lifestyle than Josh, my Black Marine buddy, or Pedro, my Hispanic Marine buddy. We had different upbringings, different microcultures, but the metaculture we adhered to was the same. We were all Americans with slight differences. So when I talk about multiculturalism, I'm not saying that we can't have little differences. You like baseball, I like football. I celebrate Christmas, you celebrate Easter, and you think Christmas is kind of a commercialized fake holiday, and you want to focus on Easter because that's more of a Christian, that kind of stuff. That's fine. We can have that. We can have people celebrating Hanukkah. We can have all of those things happening, but predominantly within all of that, we need to be on the same page and have a common culture. So that if you have someone from New Jersey sitting down with someone from Kansas, there's a similar culture there. There's micro differences. They use different, some different words here and there because of their geographic differences, but they're the same culture. That is not what is happening right now. We have millions of people coming in with radically different cultures, some of them more harmful than others. There's no real recognition of the fact that we need to have a homogenous culture to promote regime stability, meaning that the country and our communities are stable within one another because we all have a common frame of reference that we are one people. And you do not get that when you have different cultures. And that's what is happening through the Great Replacement, for lack of a better term, because that's what some of the entities on the right call it. I've thrown out other terms of what we might call it, but since everyone kind of knows it as the Great Replacement, under my framework and the way I explain what it is, that's what the left is doing under Great Replacement right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree. I mean, you see pro-Palestinian groups flying the Palestinian flag and burning the American flag. You see people that wave the Mexican flag, instead of the American flag. And there is, like you said, the left is using identitarian politics to divide a country and to just completely destroy it from within. And they're tearing down our statues, they're indoctrinating our kids to support multiculturalism, and you need assimilation. I know people,
Absolutely.
people get upset whenever we say assimilation, but you need assimilation because when you have millions of people that come here and they don't assimilate, they don't respect the country. They're essentially like parasites and taking the resources and not appreciating America. They don't even love the country. They're just here to use and abuse American taxpayer dollars. That's something evil, in my opinion. I mean, allowing millions of people that don't even love the country. They don't even care what flag it is. They're just going to abuse and use our taxpayer resources for their own benefit. And they're not going to assimilate. That's something evil, and that's something very disgusting. And they're bringing violence. They're bringing crime. You saw with Springfield, Ohio, Haitians terrorizing citizens. Colorado, the Venezuelan gang, Tren de Araguas, terrorizing apartment complexes and taking over. And the media doesn't care. They don't want to spotlight that because it's inconvenient for them. And race is something that has been very, I will be honest, I was a part of a DEI committee when I was a high school student. And in my opinion, to combat all of this garbage that's happening, we need to be blunt what's happening. We can't sugarcoat it. We can't say that, oh, it's something small. Let's not talk about race. Let's not talk about the mass migration because we're going to hurt some feelings. Uh, if the country is going to be safe and prosperous in the future, we're going to have to confront this issue. And it's
Mhm.
going to piss off a lot of people. It's going to upset probably your liberal neighbor and saying you're a hateful person, but you have to ignore all of the propaganda that they're going to do and throw against you. They're going to
And
call you
again,
all types of things.
I think a lot of people who don't really understand what DEI is,
Yeah.
I think that they have an understandable position and that they think it is a moral argument. And so when they see us attacking it and saying that it is evil, they think, well, how could you be against diversity and being inclusive? And this is not on accident. So the
Yeah.
concepts are slowly seeped in K through 12. You don't get it all in one year. It's slowly fed to you as a moral thing. Hey, let's include little Susie over here. Let's make sure she's included. Don't make her feel bad about herself. Let's let her play with you guys. Hey, we've got a kid here from El Salvador. They have a really cool cultural tradition. Let's have him talk about it. That'll be neat to learn about. That's fine, by the way, in and of itself. But how it builds on itself is that by the time you get to college, really, is when they start putting in the last parts of it and really giving it its real, I think, toxic traits. So, by that time, it's in HR departments of every corporate
Yeah.
entity. And if you were to correctly say that this is in implementation, it's a violation of federal civil rights and probably a lot of various state civil rights statutes, and that it's also morally a repugnant framework from which to work from. They look at you like you're crazy, and so and they'll call you a racist, and you must hate people who don't look like you, and especially if you're a white person saying this
Yeah.
is a fact that you'll get called every name in the book, and yet
Yeah.
we have to do it because at its core, those people, whether they understand it or not, those people who are embracing DEI are advancing a thoroughly racist. And so I call DEI a systemically racist framework, a systemically sexist framework, because I want to make sure that when I'm, talking about this with people who support it, that I start off with the moral high ground and explain to them that what they are doing is advancing systemic racism. So they cannot sit there and support DEI and then go out there and say that they're anti-racist and combating racism and combating sexism. They're perpetuating it on a scale that we have not seen since before the civil rights laws. Jim Crow and making African Americans sit at the back of the bus. We're now seeing forms of that come back and resurge, and it's being done by the political left. And they've mainstreamed it to the degree that corporations have DEI websites. They're basically promoting their racism to the world. Again, to most Americans, they're unwitting victims of this, and they don't really quite understand it. To the political left, this is a methodical and intentional move. They know what they're doing. They know that it's racism. They talk about how it's racism. They openly, you can't tell me that if you're at a college university and you're a dean and you tell the selection committee that we brought up 5 very qualified candidates, but we can't accept any one of them. We need a minority candidate. You can't tell me that person who has a PhD that just uttered that sentence doesn't understand what they just said is inherently a very racist sentence. They know what they're doing. And so this is an agenda. And again, on the one end, they're trying to get increasingly more, white Americans to buy into this, to feel guilted by it.
Yes.
Anti-whiteness, anti-racism, all of these things to make us feel guilty for existing, and to make it so that we have to atone for all of the wrongs in any point in time in history, ignoring the fact that everyone comes from a lineage of people that have conducted some sort of human rights violation against another person. But because ours is more convenient for their ideology, we're constantly on the hook for any past wrong. It's basically genetic guilt. I've never owned a slave. I've never held a racist opinion in my life. I've always been openly anti-racist in the truest sense, that I actually oppose racism. I think that judging people on the amount of pigmentation that exists in a skin cell is scientifically ludicrous. It just makes no sense at all to me. But the left will say that we have to apologize. So the left is trying to get us through identitarian politics to move to their side and to embrace the dingist neo-Marxist worldview and vote for their ideas. At the same time, they're also bringing in millions of people to shorten the span of time that it takes for them to get to a critical mass of 50+% of the population. And we're teetering on that as we speak.
Yeah, no, you did mention how it's an anti-white ideology as well. And that's something that I've noticed whenever I've been talking about DEI and spreading awareness of DEI and how harmful it is. The white conservatives, white Americans in general, they've been programmed to have no identity, have no racial consciousness, I guess. And anytime you mention race or what's happening, they're much more afraid. They're much more, I guess, subservient to this idea and to just bow down because, well, I have, I have white privilege. I have more privilege than my black peers and my Hispanic peers. And I always ask, like, well, what rights do you have that I don't have? I'm pretty jealous, if that's the case. But it's very sad seeing so many white, especially when I was going to college, how so many of these white liberals believe that, they have a lot of white privilege, they have this white guilt, and, they're just being pawns, they're just used as tools to promote this identitarian politics and to divide all of us. I'm not oppressed. As a Hispanic person, I'm not oppressed, nor are my, black peers or Asian peers. And, it's just disgusting what's happening. But white Americans in general, need to just wake up and stop caring. And it's going to take a while, of course, because they've been programmed. In my opinion, they're probably the greatest victim for all of this. Because as a Hispanic man, I can go talk about race anywhere. I'm not afraid to talk about race. Like, well, let's talk about that. Um, but as a white American, and even my wife has, we've had these conversations, and I think it's just unfair. I think it's just disgusting what they are doing to shame white Americans. I remember my science teacher tearing up and breaking down because of the training they would do in the school district. And they painted him, well, even though you're married to a Colombian, even though you help every student, you still have white guilt. You need to be on the other side of the line. And that's the type of garbage they are
And
doing.
that's literally a wedge, literally a
Yeah.
wedge. Those and that's this great example of what they're trying to do
Yeah.
across the entire culture. And those exercises show it in a micro sense that they're trying to drive wedges between people. And in that exercise, those two colleagues may have previously been friends, and
Yeah.
now they're being taught to see one as the aggressor and one as the victim.
Yeah.
And they're being trained that that is the case. And so it's really sad. And I'll say this. So, certainly I think that the practical application of DEI has had an outsized impact on white Americans. I do think that
Yes.
many have been, victims of this, and I don't think it's fair. I think that what's kind of devastating about that is that there are other groups in this country who have been victims of systemic racism in the past. We have attempted to overcome that so that would not be repeated. Whether that be females, whether that be Asian Americans at certain periods of time, whether that be Black Americans, they've all gone through different periods of what would be, no one would argue against, is actual systemic discrimination of various forms and degrees and significance. But we shouldn't be then doing that to other groups who most of whom were not responsible for what happened to those groups in the past.
Yes.
As a means of atonement, we should be learning that no one should be treated that way. And then the one distinction I would make is, and James Lindsay would make this argument, some others would make this argument, is that DEI and critical race theory and those things are not anti-white in as much as the intent of them is to break down whoever is in the predominant lead. And I think that the practical reality of that is that the less careful practitioners, the DEI consultants, the people who have not written on this for 20 years, they will certainly take a very, very openly anti-white wedge there. But the ideas themselves are really meant to be a system that can be used to go against any of the predominant groups. So increasingly, you're seeing, for instance, gay males are being seen less and less as a victim in DEI ideology because they are not trans, and that trans are more of a victim. So although the practical application is predominantly that we've seen a lot of anti-white sentiments, the left has constructed these tools such that they can break down any of the perceived dominant entities that they need to get out of the way to advance their identity deconstruction and further, driving so many wedges in that ultimately what they do is they destroy the founding culture, because we're all at odds. We're now creating dozens of cultures within our country in which you cannot coexist as one people, because you have all of these different nations coexisting amongst one another with no common ideology, no common faith, no common traditions or mores or values. And so it just results in constant chaos. So on the one hand, I agree, it's not with Lindsay and others who will make the argument that these are not anti-white ideologies, but I'll differ in that the vast majority of the people who do advance these ideas and talk about it, most of them will go straight towards kind of the anti-white, because that's just the easiest first hurdle. And they'll focus a lot. And we do have a lot of anti-white commentary from the woke neo-Marxist crowd. And if you read my paper, I get into a lot of it where it is leveled. I mean, I gave you that Van Jones quote. There's plenty more like that, where it is very specific about we have to take down the white majority.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they praise a lot of them, of course not all, but a lot of them do praise that, white Americans will be the minority by the year 2045. They celebrate, they cheer how, they become the minority in different states or in different institutions. And it's like if you were to replace white with black or with Asian or with any other group, there'll be riots all across the country. I mean,
Yep.
the level of programming that we are seeing in the country right now is very, very, very troublesome. And I am very concerned about the future because growing up, going to public schools, there was a lot of discrimination against the white students, white teachers. They were called crackers and all of that.
Mhm.
And, and not just, of course, white students, but even you're seeing it against Asian American students and even Jewish students across the country. And so they are just
And you
using
know how
this
they
against.
morally defend that?
Oh, they say, oh, well,
Go ahead.
th- I would make the argument, well, their case would be, well, historically speaking, they haven't really struggled that much and they haven't had systemic racism that much against them. Higher SAT scores. No, we need to help black students more because they have lower SAT scores. And statistically speaking, if we don't accept them here, then they're going to go to prison more likely and they're not going to have a good living
So you're on the
standard.
right track.
Yeah.
But what has happened in academia, and if you didn't see it, you'd think they were joking. They have attempted through higher education to redefine what racism means. In other
Yes.
words,
Yes.
you cannot be racist unless you hold systemic power. And
Yes.
white people, in their saying, even though we've had, Obama was president, and Kamala Harris is the vice president, and so on and so forth. They will say that white people control all of society, and we control the systems and the
Yeah.
power, and so therefore we are the only ones that can be racist, because racism requires an element of power, and then if you don't have power, then it's only really just discrimination or bigotry. It's not
That.
racism.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
now
true.
minorities on the left, the progressive left, can argue, and they will have academic backing to say that they can say openly racist things and then claim that it's not a racist statement. It's not racism because they don't hold systemic power.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, their whole argument is, well, historically speaking, Black Americans and other racial groups, they have never been in positions of power. And so, therefore, because they have never been in position of power, they can never be racist. And it's a disservice for, the groups that they are labeling as oppressed because it gives them an excuse to not hold them accountable, but also gives them an excuse for anything in life.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a poor score, if you go to jail, oh no, it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
Just blame it on the white person or blame it on the institution or Asian Americans or any other group that's deemed as the oppressor. And the next thing you know, you enable a culture where crime is okay because of a certain pigmentation, where low scores is okay, dropping out is okay, murder is okay. We'll give them an excuse because of what happened in the past. And you're seeing that in Chicago, you're seeing that in LA, where these mayors are saying, it's we shouldn't be blaming the individual itself because, well, that individual is black, so and they have suffered historical racism in the past. No, don't blame them. Blame the the institutions itself, which is ironic because they're all Democrat and they're all DEI, pro DEI people, probably the most diverse institutions in the whole country. And yet they go to that argument that, oh, just blame the institution. It's white supremacy. And it's destroying those communities.
That's right.
It's holding them back. Those poor kids dropping out of college, dropping out of high school, going to prison, and it's destroying those families. It is a way to control both sides. The group that's deemed as the oppressor will become numb and dumb. They'll obey their masters, and then the ones deemed oppressed will also be numb and dumb too, because they don't have any accountability.
Mhm.
They're going to be hurting themselves, and they want that. They want to keep them like that because that's how you control, those groups. You got to make sure that they're emotionally charged, so that way they'll continue voting for you 90%, 95% of the time. And it's just, it's like it's like a class of peasantry, that they're creating a little caste system of power. And so I guess the final question, or one of the final questions, is what can we do? Because we hear about, that this is happening. There's a great replacement, mass migration into the country is destroying the country. What can happen? What can we do? What would be a solution for this? My whole thing is, if you're a Christian, I think we should all be unified under the flag and under God. But I'm curious what your solution is, or what you believe we should do, or what policy positions we should take.
Yeah, well, I'll start out with kind of like from a policy perspective, like how do you arrive at the right answer? And part of the infuriating aspect of what the left is doing is, if you correctly point out that the average Black family is not attaining the same outcomes as the average white family, that's just a fact. We can look at the data. The next question should be, well, why? Why is that? And there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of reasons. And we can get into the 1960s social welfare policies that disproportionately impacted poor communities, which of course impacted Black communities that were still overcoming institutional racist policies. And then so that kind of blunted forward momentum and movement. And then you have policies that bleed into incentivizing single parenthood. So then you start bleeding into a mass epidemic of fatherless homes, and we know what the scientific data says on that. But these things impact every single racial group in different proportions and different impacts, and some affect one group more than another. But we should be able to have a conversation about that. What the left has
Yes.
done nefariously is they have robbed us of the ability to actually have an honest conversation about why are these outcomes not as good as they should be? What do we need to do to improve it? And because the answer is systemic racism and their victims, and so we have to basically incentivize corporations to have lower expectations of these communities, and colleges and teachers to have lower expectations instead of challenging them to really succeed, and not allowing people, and this applies to every group. I mean, everyone's poor white families are impacted by
Yeah.
this, as are any family to varying degrees. But you can't. The more crutches that are provided to society, the more likely you're going to be to fall into that victimhood, because it's just easier to be a victim or to just slide by if you don't have to do as much, especially if things are going to be given to you. I remember when I got out of the Marine Corps, I had like 6 months or so of unemployment, and the first month or two, I was like, I intended to get out there and start job hunting, but it was kind of nice. I was just after serving the Marine Corps, I spent like a month or two at my sister's house, and I just kind of watched movies and relaxed. And I was like, this is wonderful. But eventually I was like, but I got to get back out there. But those 2 months were fantastic. And I can understand why a lot of people will fall into this paradigm where if I keep getting stuff, I'm incentivized to not go out and actually work hard, because the first few rungs on that of that hard work might end up meaning that I make less than what I would do if I do nothing. But the fourth and fifth rungs are where I need to get to be a successful earner, and to be able to put away money and buy a home and do all the things that set me up for economic success later in life. But our government has incentivized all of that. But I digress on that. To the larger question, I think that we have to really assert that border policy should be is what is in the best interest of American citizens, not what's in the best interest of people coming here. Our asylum laws are a joke. I do believe in legitimate asylum claims if we see that it is in our best interest. and if asylum seekers have followed all of the laws. Like, if you come from, Mogadishu, and you come all the way to the United States to claim asylum, well, you have not gone to the first safe country. You have intentionally skipped dozens of countries. You have not followed a law. You don't qualify for asylum. We should make the standard higher. Congress should change. HR 2, which is a federal border law, would change the standard so that the level to be deemed as at least preliminarily qualified for asylum is much higher. And most of those people coming here claiming asylum because of gang violence would no longer qualify. But broadly, as a paradigm, we need to be able to say that our culture matters. Who we bring into that culture matters. It's not racist to say that, because culture belongs to us all.
Yes.
Black Americans, Asian Americans, men and women alike. It is our culture. We have built it together over a long period of time. We have earned it, and we should have a say in the type of people who are coming here and what they're saying. And furthermore, we should have a policy that seeks to use the existing processes already in place, and we need to start methodically removing those people who are not here legally. And we also need to implement enhanced standards for legal immigration. If you are coming here legally, and we need to have a conversation about what those caps should look like. And some years it may be more than others. Some years it may be zero. With asylum exemptions and specific refugees issues, perhaps here and there. But overall, the number, may be zero, it may be 5,000, it may be 20,000, or it may be 100,000. We can discuss that. We can have a debate about that. But within that framework, the priority should be that the people who are coming here will assimilate. They will not harbor completely anti-American viewpoints. They do not have a First Amendment right to come here, and have those viewpoints. We can screen against people on the basis of ideology and thought. We can't once they're legally here and citizens. That's a First Amendment protection. But we can add in a barrier. We should do that. We should go around. We should find the offenders, and we can do that through standard procedures. We don't have to go knocking door to door. We can just use traffic stops. We can use ICE detainers, criminal detections. You get a DUI and you're detected as an illegal. There's no such thing as them getting released. ICE is going to come get them. They're going to deport them immediately. States should immediately start saying, we're going to declare an invasion. We're going to start unilaterally turning people back into Mexico or back into Canada or whatever. Or if they come on one of the coasts, we're going to ship them right back. We're going to put them on boats, literally on boats, and take them back to their shores and release them back onto their land. We should be doing all of this, and we should be doing. And there's nothing racist about this. This applies to Canadians. It applies to Australians. It applies to Germans. It applies to Afghanistan. It applies to Argentina. It applies to Mexico. It applies everywhere. You don't just get to come here and then use taxpayer-based resources and take jobs away from Americans. And I know that the left will say that they're doing the jobs that Americans won't do. I think that's BS. And I think that we have plans to make it such that those critical industries have people. And it used to be, back before all this craziness of mass open borders, that we had legitimate seasonal workers who would come into Mexico. They would work the fields, and then they would go back home when it was not season. And we had a vibrant Texian community with a lot of similar cultural traits. And I actually think a lot of that is pretty fascinating, having lived in Texas. And I actually think it's kind of, in many ways, a model, the Texian way of showing that, white Americans and large groups of Hispanic Americans can all be fundamentally very conservative, very pro-America, very pro-founding America, founding ideals, founding principles, the Bill of Rights, and just all be on the same page as that. You don't see that in the same ratios in places like California, but we need to be able to say these things. And when the left says that it's racist, when we know it's not, we should tell them to pound sand. And we're not going to bow down to their intimidation tactics and use of fake claims of racism, et cetera. And we need to reclaim our country for our American culture that is necessary. And again, it's not just about because we want our culture. It's because our culture, as it is and as it exists, as it's supposed to exist, is necessary for this system to work and for our rights to be secured. I know it's a way overquoted deal, but when one of the founders basically made the claim that they made a republic if we can keep it, was specifically talking about this, that you have to have a specific culture present for this idea to work, and the left knows that. So coming full circle, they know that we can't keep a republic if they massively change the culture. And so that's what they're aiming to do, especially the more nefarious circles. I think that there are a lot of unwitting dupes among the left that are just irrationally woke, and they just think these things are morally correct. And so they glom onto it, but don't really understand what they're doing. But the methodical effort of the left that is calculated, this is exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to replace our culture and therefore loosen our hold on the republic so that we cannot keep it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all of those policy positions and just trying to protect America, trying to put the country first. And, that's something that's not controversial,
No.
that's putting Americans first. And especially when we have a lot of problems, poor infrastructure, hurricanes affecting states. Right now we have a lot of Americans that are hurting in, the southeastern part of the country. And then another hurricane about to hit Florida. Our priority should be what is in the best interest of American taxpayers, the people that are living here, the people that are raising families here, to have homes here, and that are wanting to support and make America great. That should be the top priority. Not these illegal aliens, not this mass migration, open borders that's going to destroy the country and ultimately make it into a United Nations multicultural hellhole. That's not going to work. It's not going to look like America. It's going to look like a colony for the United Nations with 196 flags. And that's not a country, and so we need borders. The country needs, a country can only exist if there are borders. And of course, like you say, protect the culture and ensure that there's assimilation. And so that's what we're fighting for, and that's what we got to be working on. And hopefully, President Trump wins this November, and we can see some of that policy implemented next year, and hopefully we can make America great again. So, but before that was the last question. Do you have like any website or any social media that you want to tell viewers, where they can actually go and read your work and follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to americarenewing.com and you can see our latest research. We work on a lot of different paradigms. We're working on tariff policy right now. What does that look like to protect American industry for Americans and to make sure that American workers actually have good jobs and that we're not being strip mined by China and other countries,
Yep.
who, by the way, are also abusing our open borders process to destroy us from within. But we've got a lot of good research on there, woke and weaponized. We're starting to look into Make America Healthy Again and going after big ag and big FDA and all the things they've done. But also, I'm on Twitter, and so are our organizations. Russ Vogt is my boss. VOUGHT. You can find him on Twitter. He's very well connected into the Trump circles in terms of policy conversations. He's not in the campaign, so he's not involved in that. But we're looking forward to, after the election, things going back to policy conversations and instead of all the political stuff that we're really not involved in. But we look forward to that. And my handle on Twitter is Wade Miller _USMC. I can't let go of that Marine thing quite yet, so I threw it in there.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's a wrap up. Thank you, Wade Miller, for coming here and, of course, talking about the Great Replacement and, of course, the work that you've been doing. And that's a wrap up. So thank you.
All right.